It is Tuesday, the 10th of November, 2020. This is David Gauchi. Dave Nagel and I welcome you to the 18th talk on business and energy of Forum 2100, and we're very happy to have you joining us today. Our session today is perhaps a little different from those you may have seen here before, but considering events, especially over the past week, I don't know if we could have found a more topical subject than what we have today. Our guest is Roger Sorkin, who will be telling us about his remarkable work on the power of narrative. Roger argues that it is narrative that is humanity's greatest asset for strengthening security of civilizations. And his focus is on energy and climate change, which in some circles turns out to be somewhat controversial. The founder of the American Resilience Project, Roger has an extensive background in film production, writing, editing, and directing. Prior to founding ARP in 2017, Roger created documentary and dramatic films for a wide range of nonprofit, academic, and government institutions, including the USAID and NATO. He currently serves on the Climate and Security Working Group at the Center for Climate and Security, on the Managed Retreat Expert Group with the American Society of Adaptation Professionals, and as a fellow with the Truman National Security Project. Roger also teaches energy and environmental communication at the Fordham University's Gabelli School of Business, and he has lectured at NASA, the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, and the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. You can read much more about Roger's interesting background on the Forum 2100 website. So quickly, the format of the session: Roger will hold forth for about 18 minutes or so, during which you may, and in fact, we encourage you to submit a question using the chat function at any time. Thereafter, we'll have about 10 minutes of Q&A, as Dave Nagel and I will do our best to synthesize the questions for Roger to respond to. And then I'll just take 1 minute to wrap up. So Roger, so nice to have you joining us today. Welcome again to Forum 2100. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Dave. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for making the time today. So just to jump right in, I'd like to tell you a little bit about how I came to this work, why a documentary filmmaker has gone down this path. And it's a path that I almost left. I had been working as I had a small production company when I lived in Washington, D.C. for about 10 years, did a lot of work, as David mentioned, for government agencies and nonprofits, all of which essentially had a call to action. That was a part of their work. And so it was instilled in me when I set out on that career path that there had to be a call to action as a part of any story. And it's something that I always tried to imbue with the work that I was doing. So I would always ask my clients, what is your call to action? Who is your audience? What do you want them to get out of watching this video? Which really required a fair amount of research. I mean, most of the time with my clients, they knew who their audiences were. They knew what they wanted to get out of it. A lot of the time it was just simply, we want them to write a check to our organization, or we want them to invest in our efforts. Sometimes it was more grassroots. We want them to call their senators. And so that really set me on this path for making sure that all the work that I do has some sort of purpose. I almost abandoned the path of filmmaking after I sort of grew a little bit tired of the work for hire model, even though I was very honored to do work for USAID and lots of other organizations, a lot of environmental groups whose missions I supported. I'd always wanted to turn my attention back to making independent films, which is what I had essentially trained for. I'd gotten a master's degree in communication with a focus in documentary film, and I knew that I always wanted to make my own films, but some of you might know it's a sort of daunting career path. You have to do a lot of your own fundraising. There's very little stability. The term starving artist comes up a lot, not something that I necessarily aspired to be. And so I almost left this career and decided, well, if I'm going to do something that has impact in the world, maybe I should get a degree in public policy. Uh, as I was on the verge of doing that, I came upon, through one of the last clients that I actually did work for hire for, was the US Global Leadership Coalition. I came upon the Quadrennial Defense Review in 2010. And in it, the phrase threat multiplier was written to describe the military's take at the time, and I would say it's still very much their view, even though it may not have been discussed during the course of the last administration as overtly as it had been. The term threat multiplier described climate change. And I had grown very frustrated, like many people had, that this idea of climate change had become so politicized. This existential threat to humanity had become something that divided people into different political camps. And I thought by focusing on that framing, we could break through and we could reframe the debate, reframe that paradigm. So setting out to discuss climate change as an issue of national security and one of what I have come to call civilizational stability was really the way to go. And it made me realize that having trusted messengers is really critical for any story to be effective. When people hear a story, the first thing they're doing is they're not assessing what facts you're presenting to them. They're checking you out. They want to make sure that you are a worthy messenger, someone that they can believe. I don't mean to pick on Al Gore, but when Al Gore would come out and say we have to take climate change seriously, the first thing people assessed was, who is this guy? Oh, it's Al Gore. Well, since I'm not a Democrat, I'm not talking about myself, but I think just many viewers would say, well, I didn't vote for Al Gore, so I obviously can't accept anything that he says. And that dynamic plays out across the political spectrum. That's not, certainly Democrats will look at Republicans who they don't like and say the same thing. And so I thought, well, the military is talking about this. At the time, this is in 2010, and I think to this day, their numbers are still pretty high. The approval rating for the US military was somewhere around 80%, at least in the United States. I recognize that's not necessarily the case around the world. But in the United States, compared with Congress and other institutions, the military was doing pretty well in terms of public trust. So if you have a 4-star general coming out and saying climate change is a problem, it had a lot more currency than Al Gore coming out and saying the same thing. So that for me really helped crystallize this idea that people want a trusted messenger before you can even start uttering whatever message that should be. Another paper that inspired me at the time was one that was also written by, just by coincidence, I think, 2 strategists for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time wrote a paper, very digestible, accessible paper, was fairly limited in terms of its jargon, called A New National Strategic Narrative. And it essentially presented the argument that an abundance of military strategy, operational, and tactical plans are less likely to succeed in the absence of a strategic narrative. And they went on to define what a strategic narrative is. And I'll distill their definition to basically say that it's a story that unites everyone around a common purpose and around which everyone can relate to in their daily lives. And those are incredibly aspirational terms. And I recognize that it's almost impossible to achieve a story that everyone, we're talking about 7 billion people around the world, can relate to. Probably not, but I would say we can come close to that if we put this in terms of basic human need. And that is really the starting point that I use for every story that I try to tell. I firmly believe that if you can identify the shared human needs across the political divide, across cultural, societal, across the divides of borders, ethnic groups, there is greater chance that we'll overcome divisions. We can all relate to the need to have food, water, heat. We know that in order to acquire those things, we all need a certain amount of mobility. Therefore, we all need a certain amount of fuel and energy. And so everything that I do really begins with that assumption. I realize that in our current communication ecosystem, it is very difficult to break through with a narrative that can really seep into the collective consciousness. We're also distracted by little bits of information that are coming at us 24/7. There's high rates of misinformation. There's malicious intent behind a lot of that information. That's certainly nothing new to the power dynamics between leaders and their people. This isn't the first time that leaders have used information in manipulative and immoral ways, but it's coming at us so fast. It's really hard to digest and sift through the wheat from the chaff, if you will. So really, the question is, what does it take to overcome these obstacles? I don't think there's an easy solution to that, but I think that having stories that can resonate on a deeper emotional level. When we know that when we can really reach into an emotional connection with our audiences, that those tend to be lasting more so than if we throw pie charts and data points at people. The mere assertion of facts are not going to accomplish these goals. So when I think about a strategic narrative, I think we need to be conscious of these concepts of empathy and cultural sensitivity, emotional intelligence. I think those are the building blocks of trust, which I like to consider the connective tissue for civic engagement. If we otherize and demonize political opponents, we're never going to have the trust that's required in the institutions that we expect to govern ourselves. And so that's essentially the recipe that I operate with when I'm beginning to tell these stories. After I made this first film, my first independent film, after having been in the what you might say is the filmmaking world, even though I wasn't doing my own independent work, this film that grew out of my acknowledgement of this threat multiplier concept is called The Burden. And that looks at how the US military is transitioning. At the time, it had just begun to transition away from fossil fuels towards renewables. And they weren't doing it because they cared about saving polar bears. I was under no illusions that the US military suddenly found a soft spot in their heart for saving the planet. Clearly, they were doing it for the achievement of their own mission, which is to protect and defend the security of the United States. Really, that's full stop for them. But they were able to identify that a transition to renewables was best for saving lives and money, or as might be put more poetically, blood and treasure. And when I give a talk sometimes to a more conservative audience, which I try to, because I see that that's where the needle happens to be most stuck, at least in the United States, when we're trying to make progress on climate and energy issues. I sometimes will start by asking the question, before we begin, is there anyone here who's against saving lives and money? And it's a rhetorical question. Obviously, no hands go up. But it's for me, I ask that to illustrate the point that there is common ground. It does translate back to basic human need. And we need to look for ways to identify that before we engage people in political discussions about how we get from here to there. So I have two clips I'd like to show you. I think these illustrate the narratives that are at work here with that focus on basic human needs. The first one comes from a film called Current Revolution, which is the first in a series that is designed to accelerate and cultivate just energy transitions here in the United States, but also around the world. These are very complex problems. They're very difficult to get a perspective on all of the many facets that go into an energy transition away from fossil fuels to renewables. I mean, we're talking about culture, economy, politics, you name it. It's all wrapped up. Every element of human life is wrapped up in our relationship with energy. And so I think having a good story can really help illuminate how a lot of these points intersect. So I will show you this clip. Give me just a moment, please, to share my screen. And what you're about to see is a community in Arizona, state here in the United States, a very conservative community. And the assumption here, the stereotype has always been, oh, well, conservatives are against clean energy. It's a liberal thing. Conservatives drive pickup trucks and liberals drive Priuses. I mean, these are tired old stereotypes that I think a powerful story can help really dismantle. And that's what I'm trying to do here. So you're about to see a 2.5 or so minute clip from Current Revolution. And this is this community in Pebble Creek, Arizona, talking about their embrace of solar power.
I've lived in Pebble Creek since 2001.
Oh, yeah.
Moved from Tennessee to Arizona. For the most part, it's a very conservative community. So when I began advocating solar electric, I was concerned that it might be a partisan issue. It is not a political issue. It is apolitical.
Hey, Charlie. How are you?
I am terrific.
We're into your hood.
You really are. And I
Yeah.
got to tell you,
So
this
what is the number
whole
now,
area
guys?
has a ton of 1,406
So we're officially at 1,406 solar energy systems
Yes.
on rooftops in
on
Pebble
rooftops
Creek,
in Pebble Creek.
which is what, 30%?
30%.
Of the entire community.
Yes.
Come on in. Good to see you. I'm Cher, my husband Mike.
Morning, welcome.
We met here.
When I was on the commission, we established the policies like net metering and the renewable energy standard that really led to the boom of solar in Arizona. Believe it or not, it was an all Republican commission at the time. And we actually believed that people would go solar. You know, I'm curious as a former commissioner, why you initially decided to do it.
If I can save $2,000, $2,200 a year, why would I not do that, particularly on fixed incomes?
My first Arizona summer electric bill. I'd never seen a $400 monthly electric bill, and I was scandalized by that amount.
It's free, it's
It's
sun,
a win-win-win. There are no downsides.
Let's look in using that.
If we can scatter the creation of electricity throughout a neighborhood, we don't have to build a giant plant right out here in the desert that burns coal and fouls the air of the Grand Canyon and requires transmission lines to get the power back into town.
I think of the utility companies as the bully. For all of us around here, we want solar for the right reasons. It's the right thing to do for us, for the environment, for our neighbors, for the country. And then you're fighting the people that are doing it for greed. And it ticks me off.
If we don't get our act together and start utilizing the technologies that are available to us now, the United States is going to be left in the dust.
Technologies we invented.
Yes, that we invented, we're going to be left in the dust.
So as you can see, those voting results, I don't have the 2020 results just yet. Those are coming, and I'll probably go ahead and update that at some point. But my guess is they haven't changed much. I don't think that the folks of Pebble Creek have suddenly become liberals and not conservatives. And you know that my purpose is not to convert a conservative into a liberal. My purpose, again, is to show what our shared values are. I'm under no illusions we're going to agree on everything. The method by which we get there will certainly spark fierce political battles, and so be it. Let that happen. I mean, you know, generally speaking, in the United States, conservatives will want less of a government role in that, and liberals will want more of a government role. I mean, that's just sort of the way the arguments tend to break down. But what we've lost is that sense of commonality. And what I'm trying to show is nobody wants a $600 air conditioning bill in the summertime. Everybody wants clean air. So this is what I would consider the surprise that I like to give an audience, to say, I want an audience to say, wow, I never expected that. Look at how those people voted in 2016. And wow, they like solar power. So I'm sort of in the business of changing minds by destroying stereotypes and turning them on their heads. So another story that I'm working on, and I should say there's one other film that I wanted to just mention briefly. I'm not going to show the clip, but the one that I mentioned before that was inspired by the Quadrennial Defense Review, The Burden, that gave way to another film called Tidewater, which examines the problems that the Hampton Roads region of Virginia is experiencing as a result of sea level rise. And Hampton Roads is the home here in the United States of the largest concentration of our military installations stateside. And it's home to our largest naval base in the whole world. Wouldn't be surprised to know that that belongs to the United States. And it's there. And there's 14 installations. All of them are threatened by encroaching seas. And I tried to show that, again, sea level rise and flooding, it's a national security issue. I sort of stayed away from the causality of that. The film doesn't really go into why that is. I mean, there's this silly debate over whether or not climate change is man-made. Well, I think I'm not even going to touch that because I look at science full stop. So I'm not going to engage in debates where there shouldn't be debates. But there was no need to have that debate because the question that I posed is, the water's coming in, it's threatening our bases, it's threatening the lives of the service members that live and work in these communities. And what are we going to do about it? How are we going to improve military readiness and reduce the risk? So try to put it into terms that everybody can get their minds around. So the next clip I'm going to show you, and then we'll get to some Q&A, which I'm really looking forward to, is from a new film series that we're releasing called Food, Farms, and Fashion. And before I always tend to do this, before I tell you what it's about, I try to talk about what the intention of it is. And the intention here is to improve the lives of farmers and to use the power of farmers to help mitigate the effects of climate change. We have in the United States a farm bill that is written every 5 years or so. It sets allocation of quite a lot of money towards priorities that we enshrine in law for that 5-year period. And really what this film is designed to do is make sure that when we write this next farm bill, the next version of it is coming out in 2023. There's going to be, now that we have a new legislative season that is imminent, there's going to be a lot of activity around making sure this farm bill is written in the eyes of there are many different interest groups, of course, that are going to be jockeying for getting their way. And what we hope to do with the release of this film series is to unite the interests of a lot of different businesses and industries. So when we talk about the fashion component, I'm hoping that we'll enlist the power of the global apparel industry to make sure that we have sustainable agricultural practices as it pertains to fiber production, of course, and then food security. We have farmers that are struggling to make ends meet. We're losing a lot of land each year because of environmental changes. Farmers are struggling. And this, again, can really help repair some of the political divide that we have, at least in the United States, where farmers and agricultural communities tend to lean conservative. There's an amazing rift, the urban-rural divide here in the United States. It's even more stark now when you look at the election results from last week. We see our red and blue breakdown. It's really amazing to see how the urban centers, the more populated areas, skew heavily blue, and the rural counterparts skew heavily red. What we're trying to do is bridge that gap. And I think having a film series like this can really help people understand, once again, that we share basic human needs. We all want good soil to grow good food, to give us affordable food and affordable clothing, right? Who doesn't wear clothing and who doesn't eat food? Here is a clip from that series. It hasn't been released yet. I hope to release it in February, this first one. And I think you'll find that the topic that they're discussing is not one that you would necessarily think that farmers would be discussing. So here comes this excerpt. Just one moment, please, as I pull it up.
Hemp plot. That's really been a disaster how the government...
You know this is an apple tree.
Still, they got one.
I'm not a multi-generational farmer, right? I'm not inheriting farm or land. My family's not currently farming. So, we have student loan debt, most of us. So we're already in debt. We don't have money to invest in even starting our business. The other thing that I think is important when we're talking about all these obstacles, though, is that most of us aren't looking for like 500 acres. I don't need 200 acres. Like if I had 200 200 acres, I'd love to collaboratively farm that with others and like do livestock and do different type of enterprises all together. But like, I'm really looking for maybe 5 acres, right? Yeah. I still can't afford to buy 5 acres right now at the market value. I can't just go out and buy 5 acres, especially when you get out into these rural communities, the houses, a lot of the dwellings and the places to live, they're gone. So to find 5, 10 acres or something like that with a house that you could live in with your family is really hard.
The farms are there, but there are no house that this person can come and stay close to the farm and be working. She tried one of a Sudanese guy who was so interested in keeping animals, and he wanted to even move there. But it's like, where am I gonna keep you? I don't have any house close here. And besides, your kids are young and they have to go to school. Where are we gonna put them? And people are interested in moving there. There's still that disconnect between accommodation and what the kids, if they have kids, unless they're older people whose kids have grown up, and then that's, and most refugees are younger generation. They're not like that older generation that most of the kids have grown.
So at least here in the United States, not a lot of folks would think that Sudanese refugees are farming in Nebraska, and that one of the obstacles for a Sudanese refugee to farm in Nebraska is a place to live. So, a lot of our discussion around the Farm Bill talks about crop subsidies, but I'm trying to show that there are a lot of other elements of life that farmers are struggling with right now. And it's something that housing is something that doesn't just have a rural component to it. People are struggling with affordable housing everywhere. So that's one thing, again, with this particular story, I'm trying to flip or sort of dispense with the stale, narrow paradigm. So that said, I think I might have gone a little bit over. My apologies, Dave and David.
But it's quite okay. Thank you very much, Roger. So Roger, there are a number of really interesting questions that have come up as you were presenting. The first two actually are quite complementary, I would say. Paul Sullivan, who's a former presenter at Forum 2100, asks, how can competing narratives that are presented as nearly mutually exclusive be changed to narratives that can complement each other for the benefit of all? And I'll connect that to a question that's kind of a corollary from Al Arisman. How do you create a story about human need that brings people together when many in our society seem to be only interested in their own respective need?
Great. Thank you for that. It's funny. I mean, I think I maintain what I think of as a healthy interdependent relationship between cynicism and optimism. As a cynic, I'm convinced that appealing to our better angels can only go so far. Asking people to do the right thing, make a sacrifice is fairly limited. It doesn't mean I'm going to stop trying to appeal to our better angels, but I don't think we'll ever be able to persuade significant majorities of people just using the better angels argument alone. On the optimistic side, I really do believe that we all share the same even if they're selfish, and their self-motivations, we all share them. We just need to do a better job of identifying where they match up. So again, I come back to this concept of everybody wants a safe place to live. Everybody wants food, clean water, mobility, and the energy and the fuel that we need to stay warm. So, I think at heart, we're all motivated, and I don't think there's anything for us as humans to be ashamed of. It's just something to acknowledge that we all want to acquire enough resources to survive. And if we understand that we have to connect the dots for people to understand that by disproportionately allocating certain resources towards some and away from others, that eventually it's going to be sort of like shooting ourselves in the foot. So again, I always come back to that: identify basic human needs as a starting point.
Okay. Thanks for that. Actually, just to follow on, Philippe Nash asked something. Can we solve the climate change problem without solving inequalities?
I don't think so. I mean, I think this new series, it's called Current Revolution. It's really focused on just, or in other words, equitable energy transitions. I mean, I always try to come back to this point that we're all in this together. Our resources on this planet are limited. And so any sort of disproportionate allocation for one group is going to damage all groups. So I think environmental justice, another phrase that you hear talk a lot about, that has to be at the heart of any climate change solution.
Okay. We have a question from Anna Turbovich in Berlin. And her question is, her interest is on the reach, any evaluated impact of these documentaries. So let me just add something to that. Your videos have the potential to reach a very broad and diverse audience. Have any of your videos received criticism? And if so, what is your take on the nature of the criticism?
Yeah, great. It's difficult, Anna. It's very hard to measure the impact. And when I sometimes have to present to a potential funder, that's what they want to know. And I jokingly say that I can't really measure the brainwaves of audience members. It's a joke to say that I could put electrodes on their heads and watch their brainwaves and see how their minds are changed. So a lot of the evidence that I would say is anecdotal. However, we attach our work to policy objectives and outcomes. And while it would be a stretch for me to say that a particular piece of legislation passed because our film was made, it's not a stretch to say that our film is an effective tool for advocating for legislation that has subsequently passed. So there are a number of policy victories that I like to point to where we've teamed up with NGOs. And when I say we, I mean, it's mostly me. I have a board of directors, but I'm mostly the full-time staff here. I do all the aspects of the filmmaking, just about. I mean, I hire subcontractors as needed, but evaluating that impact is challenging. And as far as the criticism part of that question, it's funny. I mean, I've looked for that. I want to hear what the criticisms are, but I really try to make these airtight arguments. I sort of play this exercise in my mind of, for those of you, and I know we have an international audience, but we have probably somewhat familiar with Fox News here in the United States. There are two particularly loud-mouthed anchor people on the opinion shows for Fox News, Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity. So I asked myself, how might Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity attack my film if I had the good fortune of getting on their radar screen, which I haven't yet had that. I'd like to. But I really don't think they have anything they could throw at it, because I would just come back to the question, well, Tucker, Sean, are you against saving lives and money? Because that's what our military is saying. That's what our conservative friends here in Arizona are saying. They want to save money. They want to save lives. They want a better quality of life. So what do you have against that? So in that sense, I see it as fairly airtight. And I haven't received much criticism from the right when it comes to these arguments. From the left, every now and then, if I'm at an environmental film festival, there's always someone in the audience that says I'm glorifying the military. And what I like to tell them is, I take your point. I understand you don't want to have such a large military with such a footprint around the world. I mean, I'd be the first to acknowledge that we've done a lot of damage with our military over the years across the globe in terms of disrupting culture, society, quality of life, and environment. But I would say at the same time, at least to citizens in the United States, 20 cents of every dollar, like it or not, I particularly don't like it myself, but like it or not, 20 cents of every dollar that you pay in taxes is going to our national defense. So don't you want to make sure that that 20 cents is being used for more environmentally friendly solutions? And that generally neutralizes that criticism. And at the same time, I try to point out the distinction between our military and our military industrial complex. It's the latter that I think is the problem, not the former. The former I tend to describe more as the hammer and the screwdriver in the toolkit. The military-industrial complex is the carpenter. So if we want those tools to be used in better ways, the tools aren't going away. We got to make sure we have better carpenters using them.
Roger, actually that invokes two questions. They're kind of related. The first is from Christopher Dollison, who writes, what has been your experience lecturing at military academies and active duty military events? For background, he is currently in the military, Christopher, and he just piloted a climate program with US military cadets this morning. So he's curious as to what messages galvanize the military audience to action.
I'd say it's been favorable. I mean, I was at West Point and the Naval Academy 2 times, twice at both. And once was under the Obama administration, one time at West Point and Naval Academy, and another was under the Trump administration. And I was still invited. I sort of knew that I wasn't going to go. I didn't want to get anyone in trouble. Those to me, it's sort of the unspoken understanding that I wasn't going to thank them for bringing me in to talk about why their boss is misguided when talking about climate. So again, this comes into this question of meeting the audience where they are, not just with the films that I do, but also when I give a talk. So I knew that going to these military academies when people were reluctant to talk about climate change in the current administration would be sort of a sensitive topic. And so, I just made it really clear, we understand your mission here is protecting and defending the United States. And we conclude that the best way to defend and protect the United States is by moving towards renewables and getting away from fossil fuels. And for the military, it is a question of life and death. Force protection is at the heart of every decision that they make. Ideology, political ideology, is a dangerous thing, no matter what side it's coming from for someone in uniform. They're looking at where is the immediate threat, where's the enemy coming from. In this case, they see that they're less vulnerable if they don't have, let's say, highly flammable fuel convoys coming up through dangerous hostile terrain every 12 hours that they have to also protect so that they can go out tomorrow and get more fuel. If they had solar that they could generate in place, then they're not vulnerable in that sense. So, really just, again, putting it in very clear terms that the audience would embrace. In this case, the military would definitely embrace an argument like that.
Okay, so the last question, Roger, and this is sort of building on something that Sasha Nick has asked. It seems your videos are vehicles for advocating changes that businesses, governments, and communities could adopt. We have no quarrel with that because nothing changes unless someone first advocates the change. But not all forms of advocacy are successful. What weaknesses do you see in other approaches to advocacy? And what do you do to steer away from these weaknesses in your own videos? And let me just add what Sasha is asking. How can we change the bigger narratives away from growth, consumption, materialism, individualism, and so forth?
Great. Yeah, I think this comes to another objective that I have and that my organization, American Resilience Project, has as part of our mission. And I'll just say very quickly, I formed a nonprofit to do this work because I realized that these films are mission driven. I'm not in the entertainment industry necessarily. And so, I'm really trying to change culture and perspective. And I think when it comes to these are incentives, really, how do we change the culture of business? I think business is a big part of this. We've been stuck with these profit incentives for so long that we have to have the cheapest, fastest, and the most of whatever whenever we want. And that's the way we measure success and progress. And I think those are as your question implies, those are going to work against sustainability. So I think if we can reconfigure the profit or the incentive structure for how we, in other words, do well in business by doing good in the world, not just as sort of a separate, what sometimes is a greenwashing or public relations strategy to appear sustainable while you continue on making money the same way you always had. If we can integrate sustainability as the most effective profit generating mechanism, then I think we'll transform the culture of business. And I look to the UN Sustainable Development Goals as my guide for that. There's a lot of terrific businesses already that have embraced the UN SDGs and are integrating them into their incentive structure. So I'm not a business expert, but I could tell you that there is a cultural component to this, and there's a perspective that if we can get to people, at the beginning of their careers, and so that they're not locked into this quarterly profit structure where the only thing they care about is making sure that Q3 is better than Q2, then I think there's some hope.
Okay, Roger, thank you very much. I think we now are probably out of time, but this has been a remarkably informative discussion. So if anyone in the audience would like to engage Roger in dialogue, by all means, you will find his contact information on the Forum 2100 website, forum2100.org. And Roger, we are grateful to have had you as our guest today. And Dave Nagel and I wish you great success with all of your inspiring projects at ARP. And for all of you in the audience today, thank you for joining us. We shall be returning after the first of the year with more programs in the Business and Energy series of Forum 2100. So please pass the word and come back. But until 2021, Dave Nagel and I wish you and your loved ones to be safe and in good health and in good spirits too. Thanks again for joining us today. Bye for now.